They didn't see a warrior. They saw ink. Too much of it, too scattered, too crude. Lines that looked like mistakes, symbols that made no sense, marks that seemed to crawl across her skin without pattern or purpose. So they circled her, tested her, mocked what they didn't understand. They thought the tattoos told a story of weakness, of poor decisions and poor judgment. They were wrong. Those marks weren't decoration. They were navigation. They were confession. They were promises written in blood to people who could no longer speak for themselves. And by the time they discovered what each crude line really meant, what she had survived, what she had led, what those tattoos had cost her to earn, it was too late to take back the words, too late to undo the judgment. The room had already gone silent. The truth had already landed like a blade. Now, before we show you the moment the entire training hall stood still, before we reveal what the kid's drawing really was, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Tap like if you believe in silent strength. Subscribe and hit that bell icon so you never miss these stories. Because today's lesson isn't about how loud you are. It's about what you carry that no one else can see. The Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado didn't look like much from the outside. Tan stucco walls baking under California sun, chain link fencing, a faded American flag hanging between two dusty palm trees. Nothing glamorous, nothing soft, just the kind of place where legends were made quietly without fanfare, without apology. Inside Training Hall C, 40 operators sat packed onto aluminum benches. SEALs fresh from their first deployments, Marine Raiders with new tabs still crisp on their shoulders, Army Rangers who'd maxed every PT test thrown at them. Even a handful of Air Force pararescue jumpers lean and coiled like springs. All of them mid-20s, all of them carved from gym steel and caffeine, and the absolute certainty that they were the best. The Joint Forces Survival Symposium. 3 days of inter-branch training led by someone with operational experience. That's what the memo said. Operational experience, whatever that meant. The real instructors hadn't shown up yet, so the room had drifted into that comfortable territory of side bets and low-grade posturing. Who could ruck the farthest? Who had the worst combat story? Who had earned their tab the hardest way? That's when Staff Sergeant Brennan Stone noticed her. She was sitting dead center, 2 rows up. Small frame, compact shoulders, plain black PT shirt with no unit insignia, no rank, no identifying markers. She hadn't spoken a word since entering 10 minutes earlier. Her head was tilted slightly down as she methodically laced one boot tighter, pulling each cross with the same deliberate pressure. Precise, quiet, like she was alone in the room. But it was the tattoos that caught attention. They crawled up both arms like invasive vines. Thick black line work, jagged shapes that looked half-finished, faded foreign symbols that might have been letters or might have been something else entirely. Constellations, primitive marks that looked almost burned into place. No artistic flourishes, no aesthetic intention, no color, just black ink, too much of it messy and aggressive and strange. Brennan elbowed the Marine next to him. Corporal Danny Silva smirked. Looks like someone walked into a tattoo shop and said, "Surprise me." Silva chuckled under his breath. "She lose a bet or something," another voice behind them. Private Jake Thornton whispered just loud enough to carry. Walking graffiti wall. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the benches. Heads turned, eyes lingered. Not hostile exactly, just curious, amused. The way you'd look at something that didn't quite fit, something out of place in a room full of people who knew exactly where they belonged. Brennan couldn't help himself. He leaned forward across the bench line and tapped her lightly on the shoulder, not aggressive, just casual, like he was doing her a favor by acknowledging her existence. "Hey," he said, voice just loud enough to cut through the murmur of a conversation. "Why so many tattoos? You run out of skin or just running from something?" The laughter spread wider this time. More heads turned. A few guys grinned. Someone muttered, "Jesus, Brennan," but didn't sound disapproving. More like impressed at the audacity. She paused mid-lace. Her fingers stopped moving. But she didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge him directly. Instead, she lifted her chin just slightly enough that her voice would carry and said calm as still water, "You don't know what you're looking at." Brennan blinked. There was no heat in her tone, no defensiveness, No embarrassment, just a statement, a fact delivered without decoration. And somehow that made it land harder than any comeback could have. "Oh, I know a bad tattoo job when I see one," he shot back, grinning wider now, playing to the crowd. This time no one laughed. Not right away. Something about the way she turned her head, just briefly, just enough to glance at him over her shoulder. No anger, no insecurity, just stillness. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. The kind that waits. She rolled her sleeve down slightly, covering a few of the bolder lines. Not in shame, more like someone sheathing a blade. Deliberate, controlled. Then she went back to her boots. The room shifted, subtle. The air got tighter. The jokes dried up. And Brennan, for just a flicker of a second, felt something he didn't recognize. Not fear exactly. Just the faint sense that he'd touched something he didn't understand. Something that might bite back. But he leaned back anyway. Smug. Satisfied. He thought he'd won. The others weren't so sure. She stayed seated, hands resting on her knees, eyes forward, and then the door opened. The hinges creaked with the weight of authority. Sharp-clipped, boot steps echoed across concrete. The chatter died instantly. Benches rattled as 40 pairs of boots hit the floor in near unison. Years of conditioning, respect hardwired into muscle memory. Gunnery Sergeant Dutch Rawlings stepped into the room first. Mid-40s, broad shoulders, buzzed gray hair, face weathered like old leather. He carried a clipboard in one hand and the kind of expression that said he'd buried more good men than these recruits had ever met. He didn't bother introducing himself, didn't need to. "Sit," he said flatly. They sat. Rawlings paced slowly in front of the benches, scanning faces like he was counting rifles before a breach. His eyes moved methodically, left to right, row by row, measuring, cataloging, deciding who would last and who would fold. "This is not a motivational seminar," he said, voice cutting through the room like a saw blade. "This is not a TED Talk. This is not a place where you get participation trophies for showing up. This is a practical assessment. You are not here to be impressed. You are here to learn." He stopped pacing, turned to face them head on. "So on, you'll do 3 drills today, 1 physical, 1 cognitive, 1 tactical. You will do them fast, you will do them quiet, you will not ask questions unless I tell you to ask questions. And you will not assume you know more than the person teaching you." He let that last sentence hang in the air. Then his eyes swept the room again. Stopped, locked onto her. "You can," he said, pointing without hesitation. "Step forward." She stood. No grunt, no shift of weight, just a clean, smooth rise to her feet like a spring uncoiling. She stepped forward with surgical efficiency. Her boots didn't even squeak against the polished concrete. Brennan smirked behind her, leaned toward Silva. "Watch her fold," he muttered under his breath. Silva said nothing, just watched. Rawlings led her to the far corner of the hall where a 180-pound weighted dummy lay face down on a thick rubber mat. Beside it, a full loadout of tactical gear was stacked in neat piles. Plate carrier, helmet, ruck, ammunition pouches, the works. "Drag it to the wall, Tim," Rawlings said, nodding toward the opposite end of the hall. "Full kit. Clock starts when you move. No countdown, no on your mark, just expectation." She didn't blink, didn't stretch, didn't psych herself up. She just moved. Fast hands, straps, buckles, clips. The plate carrier went on first, secured tight across her chest, then the helmet. Then the ruck loaded with sandbags to simulate ammo and gear. She adjusted the weight distribution with 2 quick tugs, settling it high on her shoulders where it belonged. Then she dropped into position. Wrapped the drag harness around the dummy's torso, locked her grip, and started to pull. No explosion of effort, no shouting, no theatrics, just pure mechanical movement. Heel over heel, step after step. Her center of gravity stayed low. Her breathing stayed controlled. Her face stayed unreadable. She looked like a machine designed for one purpose and executing it without complaint. The room watched in silence. No one cheered. No one made a sound. They just stared as she covered the distance in half the time the previous best candidate had managed. When she reached the wall, she released the harness, stood, and turned back toward Rawlings' force. "Reset," he'd barked. She walked back to the start line. No celebration, no acknowledgement, just silent compliance. Brennan's smirk had faded. His jaw was tight now. Something uncomfortable was starting to coil in his stomach. Not embarrassment yet, not fully, just the first whisper of it. The sense that maybe he'd misjudged something. Rawlings handed her a headset, gestured to a digital panel mounted on the wall. Put it on. She did. The moment the headset settled over her ears, chaos erupted. Loud white noise blasted through the speakers. Gunfire, explosions, screaming, engine roar, an auditory assault designed to fracture focus. And on the screen in front of her, a rotating puzzle matrix appeared. Memory, logic, sequence, patterns that shifted every 3 seconds. A timer clicked on. 90 seconds. She didn't hesitate. While others would have flinched or pulled back from the noise, she kept her eyes locked on the screen. Her fingers began tapping. Precise, rhythmic, never glancing away, never second-guessing. The chaos poured into her ears and she absorbed it without reaction. Like she'd lived in it before. Like it was home. At 90 seconds, the screen flashed green. Completed. She was the only person in the room who'd finished. The only one who hadn't pulled the headset off halfway through, overwhelmed by the sensory assault. Rawlings took the headset back. No praise, no acknowledgement. Just a curt nod. Last one, he said. He tapped a tablet. A simulation appeared on the large monitor mounted on the front wall. Drone footage. Overhead view of a mock village compound. Walls, buildings, narrow alleys, trees. A typical layout for a target area. Identify the entry point flaw, Rawlings said. 60 seconds. She stood still, watched the screen for 5 seconds. 15. The room started to shift uncomfortably. Was she frozen? Had she hit her limit? Then she spoke, clear, confident, no hesitation. Northwest approach, overgrown trail leading to the compound perimeter. Tire compression patterns visible in the vegetation. Spacing is irregular. That's not patrol movement. That's heavy weapons team positioning for ambush. Main entry point is bait. Real threat is the flank team waiting in the vegetation. Rawlings stared at her for 3 full seconds. Then he nodded. Slow, deliberate, almost imperceptible. Correct. She returned to her seat without looking at anyone. No swagger, no flex, just a quiet return to the bench as if she'd done nothing more complicated than tie her boots. Brennan leaned towards Silva, voice lower this time, less confident. She thinks she's special forces or something. Without turning her head, without even glancing back, she spoke. Her voice carried just enough to reach him. I don't think anything. I know what I've done. The room went cold. Rawlings paused mid-note on his clipboard. Just for a moment, just long enough for everyone to notice. Then he moved on. But the room didn't forget. They saw the look on his face. The slight upward tick at the corner of his mouth. Like he knew something they didn't. Like he'd been waiting for this. Breaks at training facilities are never truly breaks. They're observation windows. Moments where posture says more than protocol. Where the real hierarchy gets tested not in how you stand, but in how you rest. The recruits spilled into the side area just outside the main hall. A patch of gravel and sun-bleached benches shaded by a sagging green awning. Canteens hissed open. Gloves came off. Laughter crept back into the group like air filling a vacuum. The tension from inside eased slightly. Not gone. Just muted. She sat alone. No one told her to. No one excluded her. She simply didn't join a circle. Didn't hover for validation. Didn't seek approval. She knelt by her rucksack, rewrapping the gauze on her palms from the drag drill. Her hands moved with that same economy of motion. Tight, careful. Like everything she did had been practiced enough times that nothing was wasted. Brennan clocked her from across the gravel. Still sore from being outperformed. Still unable to square what he'd just seen with the image he'd built in his head. The tattoos, the quietness, the way she'd demolished every task without a single word of bravado. A recruit's pride doesn't retreat quietly. It doubles down. He nudged Silva and Thornton, tilted his head toward her. Let's go. They approached casually, not aggressive, not threatening, just 3 guys drifting over like they were waiting for a bus. but they formed a loose semicircle around her. Subtle, territorial, the kind of positioning that says we own this space and you're in it. Brennan dropped onto the bench beside her, close enough to invade her bubble, far enough to maintain plausible deniability. So, he said, tone light, almost friendly, those tattoos, what are they, bad decisions or bad breakups? She didn't look up, kept wrapping her hand. They're not your business. Silva leaned against the railing behind her, grinned. Come on, every tattoo's a story, right? Give us one. Thornton smirked from the side. Or she's just a poser. No unit tags, no branch, just squiggles. She kept rapping. The silence stretched. Uncomfortable now. The kind of quiet that makes people nervous because it refuses to fill itself with noise. Brennan's eyes drifted to her forearm, to the mark he had mocked earlier. The crude, jagged lines that looked like something a child had drawn with a shaking hand. Uneven. Rough. Ugly, if he was being honest. He reached out, tapped it with 2 fingers. Not hard, just enough to make contact, to claim dominance in the moment. This one, he said. Seriously, what is this? Looks like a kid drew it with a crayon. Her hand moved faster than any of them expected. She didn't strike him, didn't shove, didn't threaten. She just closed her fingers around his wrist. Firm, tight, not aggressive, just absolute. A line drawn with no room for negotiation. Her eyes met his. Flat, calm, cold as January steel. Don't touch me, she said. Not loud, not heated, just factual. The way you'd say the sky is blue or water is wet. A statement of reality that didn't require emphasis. Brennan froze. His wrist was locked in her grip. Not painful, not cutting off circulation. Just held. Immovable. For 3 full seconds, that felt like 30. Then she released him. Went back to her gauze like nothing had happened. The air had changed. Silva's grin faded. Thornton shifted his weight uncomfortably. Brennan pulled his hand back, slowly trying to look unbothered, but his jaw was tight. His breathing was shallow. Before it could escalate, before anyone could save face or make it worse, the heavy metal door creaked open. Back inside, Rawlings barked from the doorway. Now! The 3 men peeled away. Brennan was last to turn. He glanced back at her once more as she rose and slung her pack over one shoulder. She didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge him, just moved toward the door like he didn't exist. He thought he'd rattled her, put her in her place, proven something. He didn't see the stillness for what it was. Not fear, not submission. It was discipline, the kind that's learned over years, earned in blood, tested in fire. The kind that doesn't need to prove anything because it already knows its own weight. The kind that waits for timing. The recruits filed back into the training hall with a little less swagger than before. Water bottles hissed open. Boots scuffed against concrete. Some muttered about the heat. Others just stared ahead waiting, processing, trying to figure out what they just witnessed. She was already seated, same spot, same posture, same unreadable face, hands resting on her knees, eyes forward, breathing steady. Then the door opened again. This time it wasn't a sergeant. It was a commander. He stepped into the room with the kind of ease that didn't need to announce itself. Mid-60s, silver buzz cut that caught the fluorescent light, strong jaw, posture so straight it looked like he'd been poured into his service khakis. The kind of bearing that makes an entire room sit straighter without thinking about it. Commander Garrett Blackwood. The name didn't need to be said. You could see it in the way he moved, in the weight he carried without effort. Carry on, he said, waving off the automatic rise to attention. Stay seated. The recruit stayed seated, but straighter now, more alert, hands on knees, eyes forward. Even Brennan pressed his knees together and squared his shoulders. Blackwood didn't speak right away. He scanned the room slowly, left to right, row by row, like he already knew the names and records of everyone present, like he'd memorized their files before walking through the door. His eyes moved across faces, then stopped, locked onto her. A flicker passed over his expression. Not surprise, recognition. Something deeper. Respect earned over years. He gave a short nod. Deliberate, unmistakable. She returned it. Same quiet acknowledgement. No words needed. Brennan noticed. His stomach tightened again. They know each other. Blackwood turned back to the class. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades. Deployments, command decisions, men lost and lessons learned. Today's session is not about tactics, he said. It's not about drills. It's not about who can lift the most weight or run the fastest mile. This session is about what happens when every system fails, when your communications go down, when your GPS is compromised, when your backup is 20 clicks out with no way to reach you and the enemy is closing in. He paused, let the words settle. Today's session is about endurance, mental endurance, tactical endurance, moral endurance. The kind that keeps you upright when every logical reason says to quit. The kind that makes you carry a wounded teammate when your own body is broken. The kind that gets people home. He glanced back toward her, then stepped aside slightly. You'll be led by someone who didn't read about this in a manual, he said. She wrote the manual. She lived it. She bled it. The room was silent, listening now, truly listening. Blackwood looked at her directly. Chief Petty Officer Reese Keller, retired. The air left the room. Every head turned. Every eye locked onto her. Brennan's jaw went slack. Silva blinked hard like he'd misheard. Thornton's face drained of color. She stood, slow, steady, not dramatic, just present. And when she rose, the room felt smaller, like her presence had expanded to fill every corner. Blackwood continued, his voice steady, factual, no embellishment needed. Chief Keller served 15 years in Naval Special Warfare, Task Unit Trident, Development Group rotations, multiple combat deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. She is a Silver Star recipient for actions during Operation Copper Dune, Afghanistan 2015. He let that sink in. The Silver Star, third highest military decoration, reserved for extraordinary heroism in combat. She has 118 confirmed kills as a designated marksman. She was the youngest female graduate of Bud's Class 297. She has trained SEAL team candidates, Polish GROM operators, Australian SASR. She is one of the few Tier 1 SIR instructors certified under live combat protocols. Brennan's eyes drifted down, to her forearm, to the exact mark he'd mocked. The kid's drawing, he didn't understand it yet, but he knew now with absolute certainty that he'd made a mistake. A serious one. Blackwood's voice didn't rise, didn't need to. And she's here today because I asked her to be. He turned toward her, nodded once. A gesture of respect between warriors who'd seen the same darkness and walked out the other side. Chief, he said, the floor is yours. Reese Keller looked out at the room. 40 faces, 40 sets of eyes, all of them on her now, not judging her ink anymore, not mocking her silence, just waiting, uncertain, uncomfortable in the space between assumption and truth. She didn't smile, didn't posture, didn't grandstand. She just stood at the center of the room, arms folded loosely, and let the silence do the heavy lifting. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, controlled, unshaken. Let's talk about what those tattoos really mean. Reese didn't pace when she taught. She didn't point at screens or raise her voice or use her hands to punctuate every sentence. She just stood at the center of the room with her arms folded, letting silence do the heavy lifting. And still everyone listened. Brennan didn't move. Hadn't moved since Commander Blackwood said her name. Since the words Silver Star and 118 confirmed kills had landed in the room like artillery shells. There was no room left for sarcasm now. No space for the easy confidence he'd carried into this hall. Only the growing heat of realization blooming up his neck like sunburn, spreading across exposed skin. He stared at the floor, but he could still see it. That faded, jagged black mark on her forearm. The crude lines, the uneven edges, the one he'd called a kid's drawing, the one he'd touched without permission, without respect, without understanding. Reese walked slowly toward his row, not to challenge, not to intimidate, just to teach. Her boots were quiet against the concrete, deliberate, measured. She stopped 3 feet from where he sat and raised her arms slightly, revealing the tattoo in question. Blackened edges smeared by time and sun. Curved lines like half a map scrolled by someone mid-stumble. Jagged, imperfect, ugly if you didn't know what you were looking at. You called this one ugly, she said. Voice low but clear enough to reach every corner of the room. You were right. Brennan looked up. His throat was tight. It was drawn with charcoal ash, she continued, scratched into my skin with a K-bar blade on the third day of a hostage recovery operation in Paktika province, Afghanistan, summer of 2015. I was 24 years old. The room was so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead. No one breathed. No one shifted weight. They just listened. We'd been inserted via halo jump at 0200 hours, Reese said. Four-man team. The intelligence said the compound held 12 hostiles and one high-value target. The intelligence was wrong. There were 43 fighters in that compound, heavily armed, well-trained, and they knew we were coming. She paused. Let the weight of that settle. We were ambushed 200 meters from the target. My team leader took an RPG blast to the chest in the first 30 seconds. Gone before he hit the ground. Our communications specialist caught shrapnel from a fragmentation grenade, bled out in my arms 4 minutes later. That left me and my spotter, Petty Officer Tyler Brennan. Brennan Stone's head snapped up. His name, the same name. Reese's eyes flicked to him briefly, then back to the room. Tyler was 22 years old. He'd been on the teams for 18 months. Smart kid, fast, good instincts, better shot than me if I'm being honest. We were pinned down in a dried creek bed with no cover, no exfil, and 40-plus hostiles closing in from three sides. Our radio was destroyed, GPS was compromised. We had no way out. She touched the tattoo gently, almost reverently. Tyler took shrapnel to his lower back and left leg. I could see bone. He knew he wasn't making it out. But he also knew I had 2 hard drives of classified intelligence strapped to my vest. Intel that couldn't fall into enemy hands. Intel that was worth more than both our lives. Her voice didn't waver, didn't crack, just stayed steady, factual, like she was reading a weather report. He used his own blood to draw a map in the dirt. An escape route through the Wadi system. 8 miles of dried riverbeds and mountain passes that would take me around the enemy positions. His hands were shaking so badly the lines came out jagged, uneven like a child's drawing. She lowered her arm slightly. He made me memorize every fork, every blind corner, every rock marker. Then he made me promise. He said, Reese, you mark this on you. You mark it permanent, so you never forget what it cost to get you home. The silence in the room was complete, absolute. He died at 16 minutes later. I stayed with him until his breathing stopped. Then I took his dog tags, his weapon, and the 2 hard drives. I carried all of it for 14 hours through hostile territory. Mud up to my knees, no water, my left shoulder dislocated from the initial blast. I followed that blood map through every turn, every canal, every checkpoint. She tapped the ink again. And I got out. I got the intel home. I got Tyler home. And when I could finally stand still long enough to think I found a medic with a kabarbar and a lighter, I heated the blade until it was sterile, mixed charcoal ash with water to make ink, and I marked Tyler's map on my arm exactly as he'd drawn it. Every jagged line, every imperfect curve. Her eyes swept the room. That ugly ink saved my life that night. It earned me a silver star. But more than that, it kept a promise to a 22-year-old kid who died making sure I didn't. She rolled her sleeve back down slowly, covering the mark, sheathing it again. So yeah, she said quietly, it's ugly, but it's sacred. And you can keep your lion heads and your flag sleeves and your perfectly shaded portraits. Give me the bad lines drawn by people who wanted to live. Give me the marks that cost something real. No one spoke. No one moved. Brennan stared at his hands. His face was burning, not from anger, from shame, deep visceral shame that made his stomach twist and his chest feel hollow. Reese turned and walked back to the front of the room. She folded her arms again and waited. Not for applause, not for acknowledgement, just for the lesson to land. Commander Blackwood stood near the side wall. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were locked on her, respectful, steady, the look of one warrior recognizing another. After a long moment, Reese spoke again. Let's talk about the other ones. She raised her left wrist, turned it so the underside was visible. Small numbers tattooed in precise military font. Coordinates. 37D47 and 70D32E. The numbers meant nothing to most of the room, just digits. But Brennan saw the way her jaw tightened slightly when she said them, saw the way her breathing changed. Shallow, controlled. Kunar Province, Afghanistan, she said. April 12th, 26. Those are the last known GPS coordinates of Lieutenant Cole Keller. SEAL Team 3, my husband. The room shifted, not physically, but the atmosphere changed, heavier now, more personal. We met at Coronado during pre-deployment workups, Reese continued. Her voice was quieter now, softer, but no less steady. He was a scout sniper. I was a designated marksman. We got 8 months together before his deployment, 8 months of teaching each other advanced techniques, competing on the range, falling asleep talking about windage calculations and bullet drop. She paused, swallowed once. He was better than me at long-range shooting, faster at target acquisition, more patient under pressure. He taught me how to read terrain like a language, how to disappear into it, how to become part of the landscape until the shot presented itself. Her thumb traced the coordinates lightly. His convoy hit an IED ambush in the Korangal Valley. Secondary explosion collapsed the vehicle. They never recovered the remains, just pieces. Not enough to bring home. Not enough to bury. Commander Blackwood's expression tightened slightly. He'd been there. He'd written those notifications. He knew what that meant. Those coordinates, Reese said, are where his GPS beacon stopped transmitting. The last place he existed as a whole person. The last place I can point to on a map and say that's where Cole was. She lowered her wrist. I carry him everywhere now. Every mission. Every training evolution. Every morning I wake up and lace these boots. He's there. In the ink, in the promise that his skills, his knowledge, his legacy doesn't die with him. Her eyes found Brennan's across the room. Held them. His last words over the radio were, "Outshoot me, Reese. Make me proud." So I did. I got better. I pushed harder. I took every lesson he taught me and I made it mean something. Because that's what you do when someone gives you everything they have. You don't waste it. You don't let it die. You carry it forward. Brennan couldn't hold her gaze. He looked down. His hands were trembling slightly. He pressed them flat against his thighs to stop it. Reese turned slightly, shifted her weight. The movement caused her shirt collar to pull to the side, revealing the edge of another tattoo. Faded brown-black symbols over her left shoulder blade. Partial, obscured, but visible enough to draw attention. She noticed the room's focus shift. Reached back and pulled the collar down further, exposing more of the ink. This one, she said, was never meant to be seen. The symbols were crude, angular, almost primitive, like something carved into stone by someone who didn't have time to make it beautiful. Just functional, necessary. Operation Copper Dune, she said. The mission that earned the Silver Star. 3 days after Tyler died, I was back in the field. Different team, different objective, but the same valley. The same mountains where he'd drawn that map. She touched the shoulder blade tattoo lightly. We were running Overwatch for an asset extraction. Local informant who'd been feeding us intelligence on Taliban supply routes. High-value target. The kind of person who gets an entire kill team sent after them once their cover's blown. Her voice stayed level, factual, but there was something underneath now, something harder. Our outpost took indirect fire 2 hours before the scheduled pickup. Mortars, coordinated assault. They knew where we were. They knew when the extraction was happening. Someone had talked. The compound was compromised. She paused, breathed. We fought for 19 hours. No air support, no drone coverage, no reinforcements. Just 5 of us on a rooftop with limited ammunition and no way out. My team lead took a round through the neck in the first hour. Second in command caught shrapnel from a mortar and bled out before we could stabilize him. By hour 8, it was just me and 2 other operators. One of them had been shot through the thigh. The other had a collapsed lung from blast overpressure. The room was frozen. Every operator in that hall had trained for these scenarios, had run the drills, had imagined the situation. But hearing it described by someone who'd lived it was different. It made the hypothetical real. It made the training matter. My comms were destroyed in the initial barrage, Reese continued. Everyone else had already pulled back to a fallback ridge, 2 clicks south, assuming we were dead. We had no way to signal them, no way to call for help. The enemy was closing in from 3 sides. We had maybe an hour before they overran our position. She turned slightly, showing more of the shoulder blade tattoo. I carried my wounded teammate 5 miles through Taliban-controlled territory. He was 210 pounds. I was 130. My shoulder was dislocated from the mortar blast, but I carried him anyway, because that's what you do. You don't leave people behind. Her finger traced one of the symbols. I used his blood to mark fallback points on my uniform. Every quarter mile, every turn, every ridge where we stopped to rest. And when we finally reached the halfway point, when I could see the fallback position in the distance, I used the tip of my K-bar to scratch the same pattern into my skin. She tapped the ink. Each one of these shapes is a grid marker, a bend in the trail, a rock formation, a tree line, a place where someone teetered or almost died, a place where I lost control, a place where I held, a place where I failed, a place where I crawled when I couldn't walk anymore. Her voice dropped lower. I didn't mark these to honor anyone. I marked them so I'd never forget, so I'd never lose sight of what it costs to keep people alive, so I'd never make the same tactical mistakes twice. She let her collar fall back into place. The tattoo disappeared again, hidden, private, carried close. Tattoos aren't decoration, she said quietly. They're navigation. They're confession. They're the parts of the story you can't put in a report because the report only wants facts. It wants times and coordinates and casualties. It doesn't want the part where you thought you were going to die, where you held someone's hand while they stopped breathing, where you promised them you'd get their body home, and you did. Silva, one of Brennan's friends, blinked hard. His jaw was tight. The arrogance was bleeding out of him like air from a punctured tire. Thornton had his head down, hands clasped together, not praying, just holding something steady. Brennan hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. He just sat there, absorbing every word like blows to the chest. Reese turned back to the front of the room, faced them all. You'll all hit that moment someday, she said. Maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but it will come. The moment when your strength fails, when your training fails, when everything you thought made you dangerous turns out to be meaningless, because the only thing standing between you and death is whether your mind can hold steady when your body gives out. She let that settle. And when that moment comes, your biceps won't matter. Your PT scores won't matter. Your tab won't matter. The only thing that'll matter is whether you can see past yourself long enough to do the thing that needs doing. Whether you can carry the weight that's too heavy, whether you can make the decision that hurts, whether you can keep the promise even when keeping it costs everything. No one spoke. The silence was thick, heavy, not uncomfortable, just weighted with truth. Commander Blackwood stepped forward. He'd been quiet this entire time, watching, listening. Now he moved to stand beside Reese, not in front of her, beside her, equals. She won't tell you this, Blackwood said, his voice carrying the same weight as hers, but I will. Reese said nothing, just stood with her arms folded, letting him speak. Chief Keller once went 72 hours without sleep or food during an asset protection detail in the Mojave Desert. Blackwood continued, not training, not a simulation, real-world protection of a high-value intelligence source. She did it with a fractured ankle and a heat index of 115 degrees. She kept that asset alive when 3 other operators rotated out from exhaustion. He turned slightly toward her. She once led 3 hostages barefoot through a minefield laced with broken glass and unexploded ordnance. One of the hostages had been shot. She didn't raise her voice once, didn't panic, didn't hesitate. She just moved, step by step, trusting her training, trusting her instincts, and she got all 3 out alive. Somewhere in the back row, a pen clattered to the floor. No one moved to pick it up. She's trained operators twice her size, Blackwood said. Rangers with 10 confirmed deployments. Marines who thought they had already seen the worst combat had to offer. And she did it without screaming, without pushing, without breaking them down to build them back up. She did it with presence, with competence, with the kind of quiet authority that makes people want to follow her into fire because they know she's already been there and walked back out. Brennan didn't lift his eyes. Neither did Silva. Neither did Thornton. Neither did anyone who'd smirked or whispered or judged in those first 15 minutes before they knew who she was. The energy in the room was different now. Not fear, not reverence exactly, just the quiet recalibration that happens when a crowd realizes they were standing in the presence of someone they thought they understood and didn't. Someone they'd reduced to assumptions and surface-level judgments. Someone who'd carried more weight and walked through more fire than any of them could imagine. Reese hadn't gloated, hadn't flexed, hadn't demanded respect or acknowledgement. She just told the truth. Let the stories speak for themselves. Let the ink explain what words couldn't fully capture. She looked around the room now, slow and even, making eye contact with different faces. Not challenging, not judging, just seeing them, really seeing them. "I'm not here to impress you," she said. "I'm not here to be liked. I'm not here to prove I belong in this room. I'm here to teach you how to stay alive when everything you think makes you strong turns out to be irrelevant." Her tone never changed. She didn't lean into it, didn't add emphasis or drama. She just said it like a statement of weather, like the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. "You'll all face that moment," she repeated. "The moment when the only thing between you and failure is whether you can see past your own ego long enough to do what's necessary. Whether you can trust the person next to you even when they don't look like what you expected. Whether you can carry someone else's weight when your own is already too much." She paused. "And if you can't, people die. Not because you weren't strong enough, not because you weren't fast enough, but because you were too busy proving something that didn't need proving." The projector behind her flickered on. A new slide appeared. Bullet points, mission parameters, technical data, but nobody looked at it. They were still looking at her, still processing, still trying to reconcile the woman with too many tattoos and the warrior who'd lived through scenarios that would break most people. "Let's talk about psychological failure," Reese said, turning toward the screen, "starting with stress decay at hour 36 of sustained operations." The session continued, but it was different now. The jokes were gone. The side conversations were gone. The casual disrespect was gone. In its place was something quieter, something harder to name. Not worship, not fear, just the simple recognition that the person standing in front of them had earned every scar, every mark, every quiet moment of authority. And nobody questioned it anymore. The session ran another 40 minutes. Reese walked them through case studies, real missions, real failures, real decisions that cost lives or saved them. She used her own experiences as examples, but never made herself the hero, just the survivor, the person who'd been there and learned the lessons written in blood and fire. When it finally ended, the recruits didn't scatter like they usually did. No rush to the hallway, no immediate release of tension through jokes or bravado. Just the soft scrape of chairs and the sound of boots on concrete moving slower than before. Like they were standing in the presence of something fragile they didn't want to break. Reese packed her gear in silence. A small worn duffel bag, a notebook with water-stained pages. Nothing else. She moved with the same quiet precision she'd carried through every second of instruction. Economy of motion. Nothing wasted. Then came the voice behind her. "Chief Keller." She turned. Brennan stood there, shoulders squared, jaw locked, but his voice didn't carry the same tone as before. No arrogance, no swagger, no easy confidence. Just the weight of someone who'd seen the gap between what they thought they knew and what was real. "I'm sorry," he said. The words came out quiet, steady, but you could hear the effort behind them, the genuine regret. Reese studied him for a second, not harshly, just measured, reading him the way she'd read terrain, looking for what was underneath. "You judge the paint," she said. Her voice was level. No anger, no bitterness, just fact. "Not the steel underneath." Brennan nodded, his hands were at his sides, fingers twitching slightly like he wanted to do something with them, but didn't know what. "I didn't know who you were," he said. "That's the problem," Reese replied. "You didn't ask." Silva stood a few feet back, watching, listening. The others lingered near the doorway, pretending to look busy but still tuned in, still present. I wasn't trying to, Brennan started, but she raised a hand slightly, cut him off without force. You don't have to explain, she said. You're young, you're strong. You think you've already met the world. You think you know what competence looks like because you've been told you're competent. You've been told you're elite. You've been told you're the best. She stepped forward once, just close enough that her words landed without volume. But here's the truth. This job doesn't care how fast you are, doesn't care how charming you are, doesn't care how clean your service record is. It cares about one thing, how you respond when you're stripped down to nothing but decision and instinct. When there's no time to think, no time to plan, no time to prove you're the smartest person in the room. Just you and the choice and the consequences. She held his gaze. And the moment you stop respecting the people beside you, the moment you assume the loudest ones are the strongest ones, the moment you judge someone by what they show instead of what they carry, you put someone at risk. Maybe your teammate, maybe a civilian, maybe yourself. Brennan swallowed hard, couldn't respond. The words were landing too deep, cutting through layers of ego and training and self-image that had been built over years. You'll learn or you won't, Reese said. But if you plan to walk into rooms like this again, you better start looking at what people carry, not what they show. Then she stepped past him, not cold, not distant, just done. The lesson was over. The rest was up to him. Brennan turned slightly as she walked away, mouth opening like he wanted to add something, to explain or defend or apologize more thoroughly. But nothing came out. There was nothing left to say. And somehow that made the lesson land harder. The truth didn't need more words. It just needed to be heard. Most of the recruits had cleared the room. A few hung back near the door, speaking in low tones, or simply staring at the floor trying to process what had just unfolded. Whatever had started as a routine interbranch symposium had become something else entirely. Something they didn't have the words for yet. Something that sat heavy in their chests and made their previous confidence feel hollow. Reese was halfway to the exit when a voice small and careful came from the middle row. Chief? She turned slightly. It was one of the youngest in the room, a Navy recruit barely out of the academy, face still soft with youth under his buzz cut. Private Jake Thornton. He looked down as he spoke, but his voice didn't shake. Why all of them, really? The question hung in the air. Simple, direct, but carrying the weight of genuine curiosity, not challenge. The others who'd been leaving slowed, stopped. Even the ones halfway out the door paused, turned back. They wanted to hear this too. Reese took a breath, looked down at her own forearms, the faded symbols, the blotchy lines, the sharp edges blurred by time and sun, and the slow erosion of years lived hard. She walked back toward the front of the room. No tension, no flare of drama, just her boots over concrete and the distant hum of the old air conditioning unit struggling against California heat. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because memory fades, she said. Ink doesn't. The room didn't move, didn't breathe, just listened. She looked around, not at any one face in particular, just at all of them. All the muscle, all the youth, all the egos still soft enough to shape, all the confidence that hadn't been tested yet by real failure or real loss. Some tattoos mark where I survived, she continued. Her voice was steady but quieter now, more personal. Some mark where I failed, and some, her voice caught, not from weakness, not from emotion overwhelming her, just from the simple weight of truth being spoken aloud. Some keep the ones I lost close. There was no pause for effect, no trembling, no theatrical display of grief, just truth delivered plain. She rolled her sleeve back down slowly, covering most of the chaotic ink again. The marks disappeared beneath fabric like smoke returning to air, like something sacred being put away after being shown. You won't understand today, she said. You're not supposed to. You're still whole, still clean, still lucky. You haven't had to make the choices that carve themselves into your skin and your memory and your sleep. She reached for her duffel bag, slung it over her shoulder with practiced ease. But one day when the plan's gone, when your strength breaks, When the world stops caring about your PT scores and your combat tabs and your service record, you'll look down at your arms. And maybe they'll still be clean, maybe they won't. She turned toward the door. The light from the hallway poured through the glass, bright and harsh after the dim fluorescence of the training hall. But either way, you'll know what you carry, and you'll understand why I wrote mine down. Then she walked out into that light. No salute, no goodbye, no final motivational speech, just quiet boots against tile. The sound fading as she moved down the corridor and disappeared into the California afternoon. No one followed her. No one spoke. Not yet. They just watched the ink vanish behind the sunbeam and wondered how many stories they'd never see. How many scars lived beneath the surface of every person they'd ever judged without knowing. How many quiet warriors walked among them, carrying weight they couldn't begin to imagine. The room emptied slowly after that. Not like after a drill or a briefing, more like after a funeral. Quiet, staggered, contemplative. People processing something they didn't quite have words for yet. Brennan stayed seated, his elbows rested on his knees, palms dangling open like he'd just dropped something important and didn't know where it landed. He stared at the floor where Reese had stood just minutes earlier. There was nothing there now, just scuffed concrete and the faint outline of boot prints that would fade by morning. But it felt like something still lingered. A presence, a truth, a weight he couldn't name. He didn't know what to do with it, didn't know how to carry it, just knew it was there now, permanent, like ink under skin. A moment later, boots crunched nearby. Silva sank onto the bench beside him with a long exhale. They sat in silence for a while, watching the last of the recruits shuffle out. The door kept swinging open and closed, each time letting in more light and more heat until finally it stayed closed. Silva broke the silence first. "You going to apologize again tomorrow?" Brennan didn't look up, just kept staring at that empty space on the floor. "Yeah," he muttered it. "Yeah, I am." He scratched the back of his neck, blew out a shaky breath that sounded like it had been held too long. "I thought she was some admin they sent to make a point," he said quietly. "You know, diversity box check. Someone they could parade around and say, look, we're inclusive, we're progressive, we put women in the training programs." Silva didn't answer, didn't need to. They both knew what Brennan meant. They'd both thought it. Neither of them wanted to admit it out loud, but it was there. The assumption, the prejudgment, the easy dismissal of someone who didn't fit their preconceived image of what elite looked like. "I looked at her and saw tattoos," Brennan continued. His voice was rough now, like gravel being scraped across pavement. "That's all. Didn't even think to ask what they were. Didn't think to wonder why someone would mark themselves like that. Just saw ink and thought bad decisions. Bad taste probably troubled." Silva nodded once. Slow. Heavy. "We all did," he said. Brennan finally looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, not from crying, from the kind of exhaustion that comes from having your entire worldview dismantled in under 3 hours. "But when she talked about that fallback trail," he said, "about Tyler, about the blood map, about carving symbols into her own skin so she wouldn't forget where people died." He shook his head slowly. "That wasn't ink. That was something else. That was a record, a testament, a promise kept when keeping it cost everything." Silva leaned forward, arms resting on his thighs, staring at the same empty floor Brennan had been watching. "You ever meet someone who makes you feel like you haven't earned the right to lace your own boots?" Silva asked. Brennan gave a hollow laugh, no humor in it, just recognition. "Just did." They sat there in silence again. Not because they had nothing left to say, but because whatever came next wouldn't be for performance, wouldn't be for show. There were no jokes left to cover their embarrassment, no swagger to reinflate their egos. Just acknowledgement, just the slow, uncomfortable realization that they'd been wrong. Fundamentally, completely wrong. Brennan stood up slowly, slung at his canteen over his shoulder. The metal clinked against his belt, a small sound in a large room. "Next time she teaches," he said, "I'm sitting in the front row." Silva raised an eyebrow. "Thought you didn't like lectures." "I don't," Brennan replied. He paused near the door, turned back once more, looking at that spot again. The same empty concrete, the same scuffed floor. Only now he understood what he'd missed, what he'd been too blind to see. But I've never seen anyone walk into a room and change the air without raising their voice, he said quietly. Never seen someone command respect just by existing, by being exactly who they are without apology or explanation. He put his hand on the door handle, stopped. Too many tattoos, he murmured to himself. Jesus Christ, I had no idea. And then he walked out, quieter than he'd entered. The boots were the same, the uniform was the same, but the man inside them wasn't. Something had shifted, something fundamental. And he knew with absolute certainty that he'd never look at someone the same way again. The afternoon sun hit him hard when he stepped outside. California heat rising off the pavement in visible waves. He squinted against it, raised a hand to shield his eyes. And in that moment of blindness, he understood something else. You can't see what you're not willing to look for. You can't know what you refuse to ask about. And you can't respect what you've already decided isn't worth your time. The lesson had cost him his pride, but that was cheap compared to what it could have cost, compared to what it had cost others who learned too late or never learned at all. He'd been given a gift today, a rare one, the chance to see his own blindness before it killed someone. He intended to keep it. That night, the symposium schedule showed a surprise edition, a practical night navigation exercise. No one had been told in advance. No one had prepared. That was the point. At 2100 hours, 40 operators stood in the gravel lot outside the training facility. Gear checked, maps issued, compass bearings calculated under red flashlight. The air had cooled, but the ground still radiated heat from the day. Crickets chirped in the darkness beyond the fence line. Commander Blackwood stood on a raised platform. Reese beside him, silent, observing. "This is not optional," Blackwood said. His voice carried across the lot without amplification. "This is assessment. You'll navigate a 10-mile course through Coronado backcountry. No GPS, no lights after you cross the start line. Map and compass only." He gestured to Reese. "Chief Keller will shadow you. You won't know she's there. You won't see her. You won't hear her. But she'll be watching, assessing your decision-making, your leadership, your ability to function when the comfortable tools are stripped away." Murmurs rippled through the group. Nervous energy, uncertainty. "Teams of 4, Blackwood continued. "I'll call them now." He read names off a clipboard, splitting the group into cohesive units, some predictable, some deliberately mismatched. Testing dynamics, testing adaptability. "Team Alpha," Blackwood said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Stone, Silva, Thornton, Garrett." Brennan's head snapped up. He was team leader. They'd made him team leader. Reese stepped forward slightly, looked directly at him. "Team Alpha," she said. "You have the hardest route. Grid coordinates November 7, 3 checkpoints. 2 of the possible routes have compromise indicators. Choose wrong, you'll hit a simulated ambush zone. Fail to recover, you fail the entire course." Brennan swallowed. "Why us?" Reese's expression didn't change. "Because I need to see if you learned anything today." The words hit him like a physical blow. Not cruel, not vindictive, just honest. A test delivered without mercy because mercy didn't prepare you for what came next. "Your assessment goes in your permanent training record," Blackwood added. "This matters. Treat it like it matters." 20 minutes later, Team Alpha crossed the start line and disappeared into darkness. The terrain was unforgiving. Dense coastal brush, rocky inclines, dry creek beds that twisted and doubled back on themselves. The kind of landscape that looked simple on a map and became a labyrinth in reality. Brennan led with the map. Silva handled the compass. Thornton kept time and pace count. The fourth member, a quiet ranger named Garrett, watched their 6 and called out terrain features. For the first hour, they moved in silence. No jokes, no banter, just focused movement through hostile terrain. Every sound felt amplified. Every shadow looked like a threat. The training had become real in their minds because they knew she was out there, watching, judging, measuring. At checkpoint 1, they found the coded phrase written on a small placard tied to a tree. "Resilience." Brennan copied it into his notebook, then studied the map under red light. 2 trails diverged from this point. One was obvious. Witan, Weirwawan, the kind of path that said, this is the right way. The other was narrow, overgrown, harder to spot, the kind of path that looked wrong. Old Brennan would have taken the obvious trail, would have trusted the easy answer, would have assumed the clear path was the correct path. But new Brennan remembered something. A blood map drawn in dirt, a route that looked wrong but saved a life. We take the narrow trail, he said. Silva looked at him. You sure that's adding time and difficulty? Brennan nodded. Chief Keller said Tyler's map looked like a kid drew it. Looked wrong, but it saved her life because it was unexpected. The obvious trail is too clean. It's bait. Silva studied him for a moment, then nodded. Your call, team leader. They took the narrow trail, pushed through dense brush, scrambled over loose rock. It was slower, harder, but Brennan's instinct proved correct. At checkpoint 2, they learned that the obvious trail had led straight into a simulated ambush zone. 3 other teams had been caught there. Forced to restart, Team Alpha was ahead now. But Brennan wasn't celebrating, wasn't gloating. He was focused, humble, applying the lessons he'd learned. They moved toward checkpoint 3, the final objective. But Silva was slowing, favoring his left leg, trying to hide it. But Brennan noticed. Silva, you good? Fine, Silva said. Too quick, too defensive. Brennan stopped the team. Show me. Silva hesitated, then pulled up his pant leg. His ankle was swollen, twice its normal size. He'd rolled it on the loose rock at checkpoint 1 and said nothing. Didn't want to slow the team. Didn't want to be the weak link. Brennan was about to speak when a voice came from the darkness, right behind them, so close they should have heard her approach. But they hadn't. You were going to let him walk on that for 3 more miles. They spun. Reese materialized from the shadows like she'd been part of them. No sound, no warning. Just suddenly there. Brennan's heart hammered. Chief, She cut him off with a look. Stepped forward, examined Silva's ankle without asking permission. Her hands were clinical, professional. She pressed on the swelling. Watched his reaction. Grade 2 sprain, she said. Maybe grade 3. You're done. Silva's face fell. I can make it. No, Reese said. You can't, and trying will cause permanent damage. She stood, looked at Brennan. New scenario. Silva's combat ineffective. You're compromised. You have 3 choices. She held up one finger. Leave Silva. Continue the mission. Make good time. Pass the course. Second finger. Split the team. Send 2 back with Silva. Send 2 forward. Hedge your bets. Third finger. Abort the mission. All of you go back together. Fail the course. She lowered her hand. You have 60 seconds. What do you do? Brennan didn't hesitate. The answer was immediate, instinctive, like it had been written in his chest the moment he heard her stories about carrying Tyler's body, about refusing to leave anyone behind, even when it cost everything. We all go back, he said, together. Thornton stepped forward, but we fail the course. I don't care, Brennan said. His voice was firm, certain. Chief Keller carried a dead teammate 8 miles through enemy territory. She dislocated her shoulder and kept moving. She did it because that's what the job requires. You don't leave people. He looked at Reese. I'm not leaving Silva over a training exercise. If that means I fail, then I fail. But I fail doing the right thing. The darkness was complete around them. No moon, no ambient light, just blackness and the sound of wind through brush and the distant call of a night bird. Reese studied him for a long moment. Her face was unreadable in the shadows. Then slowly, deliberately, she smiled. The first smile any of them had seen from her all day. That's the right answer, she said. Brennan blinked. What? The course isn't about finishing, Reese said. It's about understanding what matters. You just proved you learned. The mission isn't more important than the people. The objective isn't worth abandoning your team. Success means nothing if you compromise your integrity to achieve it. She gestured toward the direction they'd come from. Walk back with your team, support Silva, take your time, and know that you passed the only test that mattered. She started to fade back into the darkness. Then paused, turned back. Tyler Brennan would have done the same thing, she said quietly. He would have carried every one of us before he'd leave someone behind. That's why his name is on my arm. That's why his map saved my life. Because he understood what you just learned. And then she was gone, disappeared into the night like she'd never been there at all. The walk back took 3 hours. They moved slowly, carefully, supporting Silva between them, taking breaks when his pain spiked, rationing water, maintaining security even though the exercise was over, doing it right because doing it right was the point. Brennan used the time to think, to process, to understand what had shifted inside him over the course of one day. He'd walked into that training hall thinking he knew what strength looked like, what competence looked like, what leadership looked like. He'd been wrong about all of it. Strength wasn't about how much you could lift or how fast you could run. It was about carrying weight that wasn't yours when no one was watching. Competence wasn't about perfect execution. It was about making hard decisions with incomplete information and living with the consequences. Leadership wasn't about being the loudest or the strongest or the most confident. It was about putting your people first. Every time. Without exception. Even when it cost you everything. They reached the facility at 0300 hours. Exhausted, muddy, hungry, but intact. All 4 of them. Together. Commander Blackwood was waiting. Reese stood beside him, arms folded, expression neutral. Team Alpha, Blackwood said. Report. Brennan straightened despite his exhaustion. Sir, we aborted the mission. Silva sustained an injury. We made the tactical decision to return as a unit rather than compromise team integrity. Blackwood studied him. You didn't complete the course. No, sir, Brennan said. But we completed the mission. Explain. The mission wasn't to reach checkpoint 3, Ging, Brennan said. The mission was to prove we understood what Chief Keller taught us today. That people matter more than objectives. That integrity matters more than success. That you don't leave teammates behind, not for anything. Blackwood looked at Reese. She gave a slight nod, almost imperceptible, but enough. Team Alpha, Blackwood said. You passed. Highest marks of any team tonight. The weight that had been sitting on Brennan's chest since that morning finally lifted. Not because he'd passed, but because he'd done the right thing and been recognized for it. Because the lesson had landed. Because he'd proven to himself that he could change. That he could see past his own ego long enough to do what mattered. Get Silva to medical, Blackwood continued. Get yourselves food and rack time. Debrief tomorrow at 100 hard. They moved toward the medical building, but Brennan stopped, turned back. Chief Keller, he said. She looked at him, waiting. Thank you, he said, for today, for the stories, for the test, for not giving up on me even after I... He trailed off, couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't articulate the depth of his regret and gratitude. Reese walked toward him, stopped a few feet away. I didn't do this for you, she said. Not unkindly, just factually. I did it for the people you'll lead someday. The teammates who will trust you with their lives. The missions where your decisions will determine who comes home. I did it so they have a better chance of surviving your command. She paused. But you're welcome anyway. He found himself at the base tattoo shop, the one that catered to military personnel. Open early for operators with strange schedules and stranger requests. The artist was an older man, scarred hands that moved with practiced certainty. What are you looking for, he asked. Brennan pulled out a piece of paper, coordinates written in his handwriting, copied from his notebook, from the map, from the moment. 32D40 and 117D10W, he said, right here. He tapped his forearm, the same place Reese wore Tyler's blood map. Just the coordinates, the artist asked. Just the coordinates, Brennan confirmed. No decoration, no flourish, plain, simple, permanent. The artist nodded. Military ink. Yeah, Brennan said. Military ink. It took 40 minutes. The buzz of the needle, the sharp burn, the smell of antiseptic and ink. When it was done, Brennan looked at the fresh mark. Black numbers against pale skin. Clean, permanent, meaningful. What's it mean? The artist asked while bandaging it. It's where I learned to see past himself, Brennan said. The place and day I stopped judging people by what they show and started respecting what they carry. The artist smiled. That's good ink. That's the right reason. 6 months later, Brennan found himself back at Coronado, not as a student, as an instructor, junior training cadre for a new batch of Raider candidates, young, cocky, confident in ways he recognized because he'd been them. He was leading a session on leadership under stress when one of the candidates noticed his tattoo, asked about it. Brennan rolled up his sleeve, showed the coordinates. I met someone once, he said. Someone I completely misjudged. She had tattoos I called ugly, marks I mocked without understanding. Turned out each one was a battle scar, a life saved, a promise kept. A person carried when carrying them cost everything. The candidates listened, quiet, attentive. She taught me that the quietest person in the room might be the strongest, Brennan continued, that the one you mock might be the one who saves your life someday. That respect isn't about volume or swagger or confidence. It's about recognizing what people carry that you can't see, the weight they bear in silence, the scars they hide, the promises they keep when keeping them costs everything. He looked at the coordinates on his arm. This mark reminds me of that lesson. Every single day, it reminds me that I'm not the strongest, smartest, or fastest, but I can be the one who sees people clearly, who values them for what they carry, not what they show, who brings everyone home because that's what matters most. One of the candidates raised a hand. Who was she? Brennan smiled. Chief Petty Officer Reese Keller, retired, Silver Star recipient, 118 confirmed kills, and the best teacher I ever had. That evening, Brennan received a message. Commander Blackwood's office, 1700 hours. He showed up on time, nervous despite himself. Blackwood sat behind his desk, and beside him in a simple chair sat Reese. She looked the same, calm, steady, present. Chief, Brennan said, stood at attention instinctively. At ease, Blackwood said. This isn't that kind of meeting. Brennan relaxed slightly. Reese gestured to an empty chair. Sit. He sat. Blackwood slid a photograph across the desk. A young man, early 20s, bright eyes, easy smile, wearing Navy fatigues. Petty Officer Tyler Brennan, Blackwood said, Chief Keller's spotter. My godson. Brennan looked at the photo, really looked, saw the youth, the potential, the promise, the life cut short. He'd be 32 now, Reese said quietly. If he'd made it out, he'd probably be teaching too, passing down what he learned, making sure the next generation understood what it cost to keep people alive. She touched the photo gently. He'd be proud of you, she said to Brennan, of what you've become, of what you're teaching, of that mark on your arm and what it means. Brennan felt his throat tighten. Chief, you're doing good work, she interrupted. Blackwood told me about your sessions, about how you teach, about how you prioritize people over objectives. That's rare. That's valuable. That's what we need. She stood, extended her hand. Keep doing it, she said. Keep carrying the lesson forward. That's how Tyler's legacy continues. That's how any of this means anything. Brennan shook her hand, felt the strength in her grip, the calluses, the scars beneath the surface, and he understood that this moment, this acknowledgement was the real passing of something important. Not rank or title or authority, but responsibility. The responsibility to carry forward the lessons learned in blood, to teach them well, to make sure they weren't forgotten. I will, he said. I promise. Reese smiled, released his hand. Good ink, she said, nodding toward his coordinates. That's the right reason. And then she left, walked out of the office, out of the building, back into whatever life she'd built after 15 years of war and sacrifice, and carrying weight no one should have to carry alone. Brennan stood there for a moment, looking at Tyler's photograph, at the young man who'd drawn a map in blood and saved a life by giving his own, at the legacy that had reached forward through time and ink and story to change him, to teach him, to make him better. Thank you, he whispered to the photograph, to Tyler, to Reese, to everyone who'd carried weight in silence and taught through sacrifice and kept promises when keeping them cost everything. Commander Blackwood stood beside him, put a hand on his shoulder. She doesn't come back often, he said. But when she does, she checks on the ones she taught, the ones who learned, the ones who carry it forward. He squeezed Brennan's shoulder once, You're one of those now. Don't forget it. Brennan nodded, couldn't speak. Just stood there in that quiet office with a photograph of a dead hero and the weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders like gear being loaded for a mission. It was heavy, but he could carry it because he'd been taught by someone who'd carried heavier, who'd walked farther, who'd kept promises when the cost was unbearable. And now it was his turn, his mission, his promise to keep. He left the office as the sun set over Coronado, orange light painting the buildings gold, shadows growing long across the training grounds where he'd learned the hardest lesson of his life. That strength isn't measured in muscle. That competence isn't proved through performance. That leadership isn't about command. It's about carrying people home, every time, without fail, without exception, no matter what it costs. That's what the ink meant. That's what the stories taught. That's what the woman they'd called broken had proven with every scar and every mark and every quiet moment of absolute strength. She wasn't broken. She never had been. She was exactly what they needed, what they all needed. A reminder that the most powerful people are often the quietest, that the strongest carry their weight in silence, that the real warriors are the ones who keep promises when keeping them costs everything. And Brennan would spend the rest of his career trying to live up to that standard, trying to honor that lesson, trying to be worthy of the ink on his arm and the trust that had been placed in him. Because that's what you do when someone shows you the truth. You don't waste it. You don't forget it. You carry it forward. You pass it down. You make it mean something. You keep the promise. Always. No matter what. That's what the ink tells. That's what the stories teach. That's what the woman with too many tattoos had proven without ever needing to say a word.